You're tuned in to Night Vision Radio, exposing the truth one secret at a time. Prepare yourself as we explore the shadow worlds of suppressed history, secret knowledge, forbidden religion, and shine a light on the conspiracies to keep it all from us. Welcome to Night Vision Radio. Hey everybody, how are you tonight? I'm doing fine this week. I have to let you know right up front that I am operating under duress tonight. I lost my dog sitters at the last minute. Everybody decided to go out. And there's absolutely no location in my house or on the grounds where my dogs could be that you can't hear them making tons of noise. So being the mama's dogs that they are, they're actually right here with me right now. They're both crashed out. Let's pray that that stays that way. And but if you hear strange noises, barking, howling, it's not a haunting. It's just my dogs. It's just Bijou and Toby. So I hope you'll hang in there with me with that, and I'll apologize in advance if they make any undue noises. But anyhow, tonight I'm really excited about the show. But first, I also want to remind you to please go to Facebook and like Night Vision Radio. That would help me out very, very much. And also look me up on Facebook, René Barnett, and friend me if you are interested in the subject matter that we cover here. I often post things that you might be interested in on my page, and you're welcome to share any of that on your site as well. So want to also remind you that I am planning that little trip to France in May. It's going to be a very small tour. So if you'd like to get on board, I'd love for you to contact me on Facebook. We're going to be, of course, hanging out with the inimitable Henry Lincoln, as well as Tim Wallace Murphy, who's another best-selling author, and he's very, very well-versed in the symbolism in Renaissance art, the Templars, and also all things Rennes-le-Chateau. So all you Rennies, please contact me, and I'll give you the details on the trip. Also planning to go in September. So if that works better for you, the sooner you let me know that, the better that would be also. Now, I'm not going to tarry any longer because we've got a lot of ground to cover with my guest tonight. I'm really excited, and connected with him just recently and had some very interesting conversations about his work. And I hope that you will thoroughly enjoy as much as I do tonight, and welcome Walter Bosley. Hey, Walter, how are you?
Doing great, Renee. Thanks for having me on.
Good, good. And now, Walter, tonight, you've written lots of books, and your background is very, very interesting. I know you have some intelligence background and worked for the AFOSI and in that area. And we had an interesting conversation about intelligence today, and I want to bring some of that up a little bit later. But first, I want to start out with your series, Empire of the Wheel. It's a 3-book series that you've written. And today on my Facebook page and on the Night Vision page, I posted a picture of a particular site that everyone was very, very interested in, and very few people guessed that it was in the United States, which was kind of interesting. But it's a picture of something called the World Peace Bridge and Tower in Riverside. And this site figures prominently in your series. Is that right?
Yes, in Empire of the Wheel 3, I really get into examining this peace tower and this bridge site, and other aspects of Mount Rubidoux are discussed in my first Secret Missions book, the one about Juan Cabrillo and the Templars and such. But the site is very interesting indeed.
And that's Mount Rubidoux here in Southern California,
Yes, technically a
right outside
hill. I think it's
Riverside.
just right. If actually, it's virtually downtown. It is technically a hill. It's just a few
Mm.
feet, 100 or so, couple hundred feet short of a mountain, but close enough and looks enough like a mountain. And by tradition, they call it Mount Rubidoux, but it's right there downtown.
And without getting too much into book three, although that is the latest episode, I'm wondering, could you just tell me what led you to this site and why you say it's interesting?
Well, it's interesting both from its history within the context of what I've written about in the Empire of the Wheel trilogy, and also from some personal experiences, which I did finally get around to writing about in Empire of the Wheel 3, the nameless ones, and how I was introduced to this site was essentially I've spent quite a bit of time in my life in the Inland Empire, specifically the San Bernardino Valley. I went to high school in Yucaipa, started college at Valley College in San Bernardino, and through the years I've come back and left and such, and I had never climbed Mount Rubidoux, never made the walk up the hill, so I had never seen the Peace Tower. I wasn't even aware of it. And when I was in my early stage of researching the things that would lead to Empire of the Wheel. This was before I even knew I was going to write a book. This was before I even discovered the mystery of the woman Cora Stanton. This was when some very odd, strange things were presenting themselves, and I was just kind of looking into it from a personal interest level. Well, I went out to investigate a particular site, what's known as the Citrus Park, Historical Citrus Park. It's in Riverside, and it celebrates the citrus industry history that's here. And I was out there investigating some telluric current, or erroneously called ley lines, but that's what people know them as, for a researcher, a friend of mine, Sesher. And on my way back from that, I got curious about another hill and drove over to take a look, and I found a quarry. And this quarry, of course, I write about in Empire of the Wheel 3. It's one of the sites that's explored in this mystery. And while visiting the quarry, I came away. It was kind of odd. I came away with suddenly feeling all my energy just draining from me.
And what were they quarrying there? What were they?
This is an old quarry that's been, my gosh, it was first opened, or whatever you call it, when you open a quarry, I think in the 1880s, and it's been dormant for decades. And it probably, as far as I know, just granite block. That's as far as I've been able in my research to find the details of this quarry. But I came away from this quarry in the 20-minute drive home. I could just feel my energy just draining out of my body, and I felt like I was like you feel when you're coming down with a cold or the flu or something. And by that night, I had a pain in my shoulder and neck, and it was all stiffening up. Well, I suffered with this for about 3 days, and finally, it was a Saturday morning. Just 2 or 3 days after this had struck me, and it was really bad. But I got the idea that I had to go climb Mount Rubidoux that day. It was because it was lingering out there in my research, and I had to go do it anyway. But for some reason, I felt compelled in this condition to drive over there and go do this. Now, I shouldn't have even been driving my car, because I had to turn my body completely to the right, just to, and left, turn my body completely when I changed lanes. just to make sure, there's no oncoming traffic, because I don't rely just on the mirrors. And I made the walk up up Mount Rubidoux, and as I was walking up the path, lo and behold, I came across this bridge that you see in the photo that you're talking about that you've posted on your Facebook. And it's a little footbridge. There's a stone stairwell. If you're facing north, the stone stairwell's on your right, and across the bridge on your left is this stone tower. And what struck me about the bridge,
I've also, by the way,
that
folks,
in
I've
my
also
counterterrorism
posted,
days. Hello.
Oh, sorry about that. I'm hearing some cutting out, but also I wanted to let people know that I've just posted that picture also in the chat room. So if you're listening but not joining us in the chat room, you might want to just hop on InceptionRadioNetwork.com, and you'll also see that image right now of the Peace Tower that he's talking about. Sorry, Walter.
Oh, that's okay. That's okay. Well, as I said, the thing that struck me about this bridge was that in my counterterrorism days, I spent some time in a little town called Mostar in Bosnia. And Mostar's most famous landmark is what's called the Freedom or Friendship Bridge, I think it's called, the Friendship Bridge. And it was destroyed during the Bosnian War, and they rebuilt it, and they're real proud of it. And in fact, I'm looking at a framed watercolor painting of it that I bought in Sarajevo years ago, hanging on my wall. And the bridge there, the design of this bridge on Mount Rubidoux is very similar. It's kind of got a peaked center, if you can imagine that, for those who are looking at the photo, and look up the Mostar bridge as well. And from the angle in the painting, even, there's a tower on one end of the Mostar bridge that this resembles greatly the if you're looking north, the view of the bridge on Mount Rubidoux with the tower to the left. And so I saw this and I thought, wow, that just, that reminds me of the Mostar Bridge. And I thought, well, I know that Frank Miller, who, owned this property up here and built the Mission Inn, had traveled the world. And I thought, well, maybe he built this and he had seen that bridge too, or one like it. So I went up the steps, and remember, my body is stiff. I mean, I'm in pain. And I go up these steps and I walk across the bridge and I go over to the tower, and I'm looking at the tower and, standing up there, and I'm kind of touching it as I go around, because I'm trying to lift myself up a foot or so to look in the entryway, the little window, slotted window. And as I'm doing this, I'm looking at the tower, and then I notice something. And I stop and I move my arms and I turn my head from side to side, and I realized at in the moments that I was standing there at the tower, touching the tower, the pain in my shoulder had disappeared, and the stiffness was gone, and I had full range motion. And just a moment before, it had been really bad pain. I mean, I had been taking ibuprofen for it and such, and
so you went
all
to
of a sudden.
You went to the quarry, and you really, felt horrible.
I got the problem.
At
the way
quarry.
I describe it is, the quarry drained me and gave me this issue, and then the tower kind of cured it.
Wow. Now, what was the time frame there?
This, interestingly enough, this was the week leading up to Christmas of 2007.
And when you went to the quarry, then how long was it before you made your way over to the tower? Was it?
It was 3 days. Now, here's what's
3
interesting.
3 days later. So all these 3 days you were feeling miserable?
Yeah, I suffered this. Now, here's a little part that I share privately with people that I don't think that I've ever said this in an interview before. Excuse me if I have.
Oh, good. We have a NightVision exclusive here.
Yeah. When you read my books, you'll find that Hecate, the goddess Hecate, is at the center of all of this mystery. And I had met her, come across her in her form of St. Catherine of Alexandria. And there's a chapter in Empire of the Wheel 1 where Rick Spence and I present the evidence that there was no such person as St. Catherine of Alexandria. She was a syncretic fabrication based upon Hypatia of Alexandria and the goddess Hecate. and she was syncretic so that the pagans that the church at the time, were ruling over could go ahead and continue Hecate worship, but, they could call her, by the name of a Catholic saint. So St. Catherine of Alexandria, as such, never existed. It's all fake. Now, here's the interesting thing. When I was over at the Citrus Park, there was a little rose garden there, and I sat for a time on the bench and looking at the roses and kicking back, and the whole St. Catherine thing had emerged in my research. And so, as I'm sitting there, smart aleck that I can be in my research, I say, okay, Catherine, show me something. Well, I got up, I went to my car, and as I was driving to go back to the freeway, I hit Victoria Boulevard, and it just dawned on me, I think I'll turn on Victoria Boulevard. I won't take the freeway. And so I continue on Victoria Boulevard, and I'm driving along, and I turn and I look, and there's this hill in this community. Notice the hills here, the mountains. And I say, you know what? I think I'll go take a look at this hill, look around there. And I drive around, and I find some interesting things, and then I found the quarry. So basically all that to say, I asked Catherine, Hecate, to show me something, and she did. She took me to the quarry, and she gave me a little experience, and then later on things led me to the tower, to heal what the quarry had demonstrated for me. And
I was looking at some representations of Hecate after, delving into some of your research in preparation for the show. And I found certainly one representation of her. I have seen those, I think, I want to say in statuary in London, but also there was one representation that looked very, very curiously like the Statue of Liberty.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Which I thought was really interesting, which, of course, was a gift from the French. Mm-hmm. And then I also, of course, couldn't help but note that, Rubidoux is a French name. So I just, my conspiratorial mind started going crazy. But
you will really like Empire of the Whale 3 because I absolutely analyzed the name Rubidoux from the perspective of the French. I was onto that too. I realized, wait a minute, there's something French going on here, and I do get into that in the third book, is the linguistic breakdown of Rubidoux and how it could very well be named something French related, which is very interesting in our context, right?
Yeah, it absolutely is. Now, you had this sort of juxtaposition of this quarry and its sort of bad mojo, bad energy, or whatever it was.
Negative energy. We'll not say bad.
And then okay, that's very good. And then on the other hand, now where were these located from each other? Did you feel like you had been sort of presented with these polar opposites?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
There seems to be in the occult and in these mysteries that all of us are so much into. There seems to be a lot of mirroring, and a lot of duality.
Yeah,
and you have the dark and the light, and the positive and the negative.
Exactly. And what you've got is, think about it. You've got a tower on a mountain, which is a high point. And then you got a hole in the ground, which is what a quarry is, and certainly this one is.
So the opposite again, yeah.
Yeah, so there's the hole in the ground brought me down and left me stricken, so to speak. The tower on the hill brought me up and healed me. And here's the thing. My whole life isn't full of these episodes. You get two of those out of me. You get this one and the one in South America. I had kind of a more milder healing while at Ollantaytambo on a trip with David Childress in the World Explorers Club in 2003. And, those are the two experiences I've had with location and physical healing.
Now, what was that? What were you, do you want to talk about that at all? What was your experience
South America
there?
one?
Yeah.
Yeah. Basically, I was on the trip. And everybody kind of had the ick. It was early in the trip, kind of everybody, we'd been there long enough where everybody was feeling kind of to varying degrees. And that was the day that I was going to stay back at the lodging and not go up to the site of the ancient city at Ollantaytambo. It's on the road to Machu Picchu from Cusco. And I was not going to go up. And at the last minute, I said, you know what? I've come this far. I paid for this trip. Walter, get off your butt and, go up the hill just because you feel icky. And so I went. I made the walk there. And I noticed as, we were at the top, I noticed all of a sudden the ick feeling was gone. And my headache was gone. And I felt great. I felt full of energy. And then as we came back down, my energy kind of went down a little bit, but I never felt as icky, so to speak, again for the rest of the trip. In fact, I was pretty fine the rest of the trip, except the altitude at Cusco was giving all of us headaches. In fact, I remember paying the pan flute trio to not play for us in the restaurant because we all had headaches. I paid them not to play.
Oh,
and I love that music.
Sad.
So, but hey, they got paid. So.
Well, yeah, I'm sure that was fine. Paid not to work, so that's cool. Now, you mentioned ley lines, and I know that's a misnomer. I read that in your work, and you're absolutely right, because they both mean the same thing. That's another double, though, which is kind of interesting. But
sure, yeah.
How do ley lines figure into this site and the quarry, into the Peace Tower and the quarry?
Well, there is, this energy. I've been calling it telluric current, but I might be revising that based on some recent conversations with another researcher that I'm close friends with, because I think we've come to a better way to identify this energy. But for the purposes of keeping it simple, most people refer to it as ley lines, or, I've been calling it telluric current. There is, the Empire of the Wheel books describe and present this world grid energy, this telluric current ley line stuff, as it's laid out in the Inland Empire, specifically the San Bernardino Valley and Riverside. And these sites are connected to a very interesting configuration of this energy, which Sesh-Hari thinks is actually an artificial configuration that was created by certain things done on certain sites. And this configuration is in the shape of a butterfly or a moth. In each one of those have interesting connotations when you think of butterflies in general, with kind of what we're talking about here, and the whole Mothman thing as well. But
sure.
And I have a map of this, and it's in the books. Mount Rubidoux is connected to this configuration, and the quarry is also. It's part of this configuration. So you have this energy flowing, and then you've got some Fibonacci spiral activity going on there down the ridge of Rubidoux, which is kind of interesting. Now, the quarry is located south of the southern end of Mount Rubidoux, and Mount Rubidoux its ridge runs north-south with a curve, of course, going into the northeast. But the energy that I say flows through the mountain. It either flows from north to the south into the quarry, or would flow from the quarry into the north. Whatever. I haven't worked those details out yet, but there is a line there that the way it curves would suggest that there is an energy flow, or the quarry might actually have been an attempt to tap into this energy flow, because the quarry, of course, is an artificial construction.
And you mentioned the Fibonacci spiral. How does that figure in? How does that manifest? How do you see that in what you're talking about?
It's interesting. You can lay the Fibonacci spiral in downtown Riverside with the interior beginning. You know how if you start at the inner starting point of the spiral, not the outer part, But the inner part, if you place it at the Hecate shrine that I've found blatantly out in the open in downtown Riverside, and it's been there for like over a century, if you lay the spiral, if you lay the starting point there, set the starting point there, there is an angle of the spiral at which it goes through these interesting sites that I talk about in the book, and then eventually goes down the spine of Mount Rubidoux and down to the quarry. You have to, if when you read the books, you'll see what I mean by the various sites. But it's just one of the aspects. The whole thing isn't hinged on the Fibonacci spiral. It's just that you can find that in there. The whole thing, actually, I think, and Sechery and others think, that this butterfly configuration of energy is even more important than any Fibonacci spiral you could lay down.
Wow. Mm-hmm. Now, it seems to, again, I mean, it seems like every time we start uncovering things, whether it be in Europe, whether it be with our founding fathers, whether it be with the Knights Templar, it seems like at the heart of it, you always get down to some form of goddess worship.
You often do. Yes, you often do. You're absolutely right there. But there's also, as I talk about in Empire of the Wheel 3, the nameless ones, there's also a Cthulhic entity which enters the picture. And you could say maybe it's a versus thing. The goddess worshippers versus the Cthulhic worshippers. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So, it all depends on which civilization or which hidden civilization or which hidden culture you're talking about.
Yeah.
Because even though Hecate is a major theme definitely in the first book and with what I've laid out in these 3 books, in the 3rd book, the other entity behind a lot of this stuff emerges.
Wow, it's really interesting, especially to find, that it's right here in my backyard in Southern California. I got to get down there.
Oh, I was
But you know
surprised.
what? We've made it through the first half hour. The dogs are still asleep. We're still good to go, and we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be back in just a moment with my guest Walter Bosley and more of his riveting research. Stay with us.
Hello, everyone. Lorian Fenton here, host of the California MUFON radio show, asking if you'd like special access to exclusive and amazing information about UFOs, the paranormal, and all things unexplained. If you're nodding yes, then join IRN's Insider Club. As an Insider Club member, you'll get an all-access pass to premier Inception Radio Network content for only $4.99 a month. This includes live UFO and paranormal conferences, live streaming UFO skywatches, exclusive IRN radio and TV productions, and of course, paying radio with MJ and Ken Storch. So don't wait any longer. Visit InceptionRadioNetwork.com and click on Member Login to join IRN's Insider Club and get your VIP access today.
Are you a fan of Inception Radio Network? Do you reckon it's the best alternative talk radio station on the planet? Well, if you do, head to facebook.com/Inception Radio Network and like the page. Tell your friends, spread the word, and keep listening to the best. Do you have a smartphone? If so, Inception Radio Network is the best app for you. Available on iTunes, Android, Samsung, and most other app stores. Just search Inception Radio Network. With the app you can listen live, check out podcasts of recent and past shows, view our videos, see what shows are coming up, who the guests are, and, via the chat room, send live questions to those guests. You know it makes sense. Check your app store now. Inception Radio Network. I'll see you there.
Hey, IRN listeners, make sure you tune in to Night Vision Radio with René Barnett. René will be exposing the truth, one secret at a time. When? Thursdays. Every Thursday, 10:30 p.m. Eastern, 7:30 p.m. Pacific. Where? Right here on IRN.
You're locked into Inception Radio Network, Superior, Wisconsin.
Welcome back. You're listening to Night Vision Radio. I'm your host, René Barnett. Our guest tonight is Walter Bosley. He's the author of a series of books called Empire of the Wheel, which are just extremely fascinating and very riveting. So we've been talking about a location in Southern California, in and about Riverside, California, I guess, called the World Peace Bridge and Tower, that has some strange connections for Walter himself personally, when he had some experiences going to a nearby quarry and then later visiting this site that he's explained for us. Now, we were talking a little bit before the break about the whole goddess aspect of things, and it does seem like the goddess worship thing does seem...
Goodbye, summer. Hello, new fall fashion. This is a great time to shop Macy's Backstage. I know, prices are so low you never need a coupon. They have all the hottest looks for the new season for men, women, kids. Plus shoes, accessories, handbags, pet gear, toys, home decor. All our favorite brands, great designers. We always find something. Best of all, new fall finds arrive every week. We'll miss you, summer. But fall looks awesome. Macy's Backstage savings for everyday life. Visit Macy'sBackstage.com for a location near you.
To turn up quite a bit in when you start digging through these things. And I wonder, if you see that connection, or is that just something I'm just seizing on because it, kind of fits into the things that I'm into?
Oh, no, absolutely. There's a goddess connection. Like I said, I discovered a blatant, what I call a Hecate shrine in downtown Riverside. Now, here's what's interesting. I had been investigating this stuff. I'd been researching it, and I myself was into this stuff for 2 or 3 years before I even happened to look up on a corner one day that I had investigated before, and just my jaw dropped, because I'm looking at this and going, oh my, I started laughing. I'm like, I cannot believe this. There she is right there. And that's in the books as well. In the third book, and
did you find out anything about how the origination of that statue came to be there? Who was behind it?
All I found is the architect of the building, and again, like I said, that it's not Olmsted. It was he was a very well known architect at the time, civic type of designer, and he designed the building. I think it was built in 1903 or 1908. I'm getting it mixed up there. And it was just, superficially, it's supposed to just represent, the civic ideal and one might say industry. But what you have on this particular corner is are 3 female figures the central one is the one that is the helmeted standing one, and then there's one on each side of her, and at her feet is a big wheel, like a gear wheel. Now, St. Catherine of Alexandria is known as St. Catherine of the Wheel. And this was one of the first things that led me to wonder, hey, isn't this Hecate? Because Hecate's very symbol is the wheel. And Hecate is the triple aspect goddess, and she's often depicted as three female figures. So here you have the three female figures with this big wheel at the center of it all. That's what's interesting is on another corner of the same building, you've got the female figures, but they don't have a wheel in front of them. That's the only corner with the wheel. Now, here's what's interesting. The corner that's on is where Sechery, my geomorphology analyst, had prior to my now this is important. Prior to my discovery of this statuary on the building, Sechery had already provided me with a map that shows the intersection of several lines, which you draw a circle around the intersection, and what do you got? A spoked wheel. The intersection of these lines, it's the biggest intersection of multiple lines in Riverside, is right there at that intersection that this statuary on the corner of the building is facing. That and some other things right there, I spell out in the book and propose in the book, identify this as a shrine to Hecate for those who see and understand. Now, there's always going to be those people that I don't see it, I don't make the connection. Okay, that's fine. But what I mean by those who see and understand are, if you know the Hecate lore, right, you're going to see all of this stuff and you're going to recognize it immediately. Now, golly, it could be an accident, or could it be that, the people who designed this stuff, happen to be into this lore, and maybe they understand, how it works on the public psyche.
Now,
it's there for whatever reason.
I know that there's a huge murder mystery that's involved in this series, and can you talk a little bit about the murders? And then I have a couple questions about that. Sorry, go ahead.
Sure. All but one of them were in the autumn of 1915. The first, I call them mysterious deaths because they're publicly written about as suicides. I personally don't think that we were talking about suicides here, of course, and we get into that in the books. But the first mysterious death would have been in probably August of 1915, but his body, the remains, were not found until November. So that's what places him in the milieu of these 6 other strange deaths that occurred within weeks or days of each other in 1915. The next one was in mid-October. It was allegedly a boating accident on Baldwin Lake, which is dry now and I think has been pretty thoroughly dry for a few decades, I think. And then the remaining 5, 2 small children, a 14-year-old girl, and 2 other adults, those happened within just days of each other in some cases, and just a few weeks span. Early November, middle November, and early December. And
what were the apparent causes of those deaths? Did they say they were suicide also?
Well, the claim is that 3 of the adults, the woman found in the lake, who was identified under the name Cora Stanton, that she was a suicide. The last death, a man named Percival Braid from Redlands, was allegedly a suicide, and the first death was allegedly a suicide. The man on the lake was allegedly an accident. What's interesting is the 2 small children were even identified as having been given poison candy. But no perpetrator was identified, the parents were cleared, and the press at the time seemed more concerned about the suicidal woman in the lake than they were about the possibility that a man was running around giving children poison candy. It's really strange when you read the newspaper articles. And then the 14-year-old, she ate a piece of poisoned fruit. The toxin they were never able to identify. Now, some people would say, well, that's 1915. Well, I got news for you. In 1915, forensic chemistry, chemistry was more advanced than people might assume it was in 1915. And poisoning was probably was the most popular method of murder back then. The fact is, the labs back then were very good at identifying toxins and poisons, but the poison used to kill the 14-year-old girl and the 2 small children went unidentified. They knew that it was a toxin in the candy and the fruit. They knew that that's what killed these kids, but they were unable to identify it. It was one they had never encountered. Now, the book goes into the implications of that, and
I could see why you would tie in those 3 poisoning deaths and say, okay, these could have been linked in murder for sure.
Yeah,
but
those were definitely.
How did you connect the other murders together, and what is it that you actually started turning up that you think happened?
Well, here's
rather than accident, suicide,
right,
etc.
Well, the first victim was his remains, which were described mummified beyond recognition and ghastly. He was found kneeling on his knees with a bullet wound through his head and the gun nearby. And the last victim, the man, was also, he was found in his bed in his house in Redlands, and he had allegedly shot himself in the head. With a gun, which, by the way, just a couple of months before was known to have been in a police station and had been used in a suicide prior to his.
So how did he get the gun?
Exactly. Well, he was a law student and he was an accountant and such, so he might have had access to the office, but it's interesting that, he allegedly used the same gun on himself. There were other people in the house when he shot himself in the head. Now, yeah, they found a pillow over his head, but, a gun report, it's merely under a pillow. It would be kind of odd that no one else in the house heard it. The one thing that ties all the victims together is that their deaths occurred. They died in association with this telluric current. In other words, there were configurations or lines of telluric current going through the areas where they were found, or where they died. For instance, like the children, of course, they didn't die immediately; they lingered on. Right. And so there is this telluric configuration, this world grid energy, this Earth energy, that is directly geographically associated with these 7 deaths.
But what does that suggest to you then, in terms of, if they were murdered?
Sacrificial murder.
Are you saying that they were specifically murdered at these locations because?
Yes, because
of the telluric situation, or?
Uh-huh. Yes. This is my conclusion, my analysis. And there is a chapter in the first Empire of the Wheel book that yes, that was the case, that these were sacrificial murders.
Oh, so that's, I was thinking, could it be something really dark like that? Now,
well, subsequent 50 years later, Rick and I, in the first book, I had a co-author in the first book with me, Richard Spence, and in that book we have a chapter on the Zodiac Killer, and I'm pretty sure, I believe we are the first that has presented the evidence that, for the first time, that ties all the victims of the Zodiac Killer together. and that is telluric current. All the victims were either attacked or killed. Not all of them died, but were attacked or killed in geographic proximity, either right on or right there at telluric current. The sites were on telluric current.
Now, what do you think that was the reason for that? Why would they? Obviously, they wanted to take advantage of some kind of power that was there, or...
Well, as we say in the first book, yes, absolutely. They were wanting the system, as it were. And the book gets into, the possible whys. We think that there was something to do with Hecate veneration, but we're very clear that this is something that we doubt Hecate would approve of. So to speak.
Not.
When I went into this, Hecate was the dark, evil demon goddess of witches. I will tell you that since 2007, this is 2015, my opinion of Hecate changed greatly. The deeper I investigated and the farther I went into this whole thing, I have quite a different opinion of Hecate. Primarily, the way I like to describe it is Hecate is like Hecate is like electricity. Electricity is. Now, it can do great, wonderful things, or it can kill you if mishandled.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the way I see aspects of her. Definitely, I think that there was some... With this 1915 situation, there was something Hecate going on in the minds of the perpetrators.
And who do you think the perpetrators were?
The first suspects on my list would have been affiliated with the Spiritualist Temple in San Bernardino, which at the time, it was the first Spiritualist temple in the state of California. It was highly respected among spiritualists in the early 20th century. And the book spells out all the evidence as to why we put the spiritualists at the top of the suspect list. Now, when I say spiritualists, I don't mean the temple got together and said, we're going to do this, but there was somebody who was in the spiritualist ranks and probably a member of that particular temple that were the perpetrators involved with, or were indeed the perpetrators.
And how did you tie these particular crimes together? Did you first, obviously recognize a pattern with these poisonings, and then you go further out and start looking at other deaths,
right,
other mysterious things that happened along?
Oh, well, I should also mention, I've forgotten to give the details, because the woman who is the belle of the ball, the star of the show, who was identified as Cora Stanton, she was found drowned and poisoned. So you had 3 children and a woman who were poisoned, and her death was deemed a suicide about as quickly as they possibly could do that, before a suicide note was found. But basically, to answer your question, what happened was I had been doing some follow-up research on my Disneyland book, Latitude 33. And I was looking for stories of strange stuff associated with the ley lines, the energy. And I found a story about a haunting at the Inland Center Mall, which is there now and has been there since 1967. And I found a ghost story associated with that, and the woman who had posted it is a librarian here in town. Her name's Ann Walker, and I went to see her about this ghost story, and she is the one who introduced me to the mysterious case of Cora Stanton. Well, she said, you go look at the newspaper articles, it's in there, it's weird. So I went to look at the Cora Stanton case, and what happened was, I'm looking through these papers and I'm seeing, wait a minute, here's 2 little children who were poisoned, and there's a big mystery. And then I see, hey, wait a minute, here's a 14-year-old girl just a couple weeks later who's poisoned, and it's a big mystery. Well, gosh, now you got this guy who committed, and one thing, it just all piled up. Now I'm looking at this from the point of view of a professional, being a professional criminal investigator, and it's not adding up, what the newspapers are saying. To my mind, I'm saying, oh, wait a minute, they had a serial killer on the loose here. And they didn't know it. And what's interesting is this is, how many years after Jack the Ripper and, some of the other stuff, you would have thought they would have, might have considered that. But, there's nothing in the papers of the day that indicate that that's what they were thinking about. So that got my attention from that perspective. And then when I did the ley line research, that's what really blew me away. Because what I did was I had my geomorphology guy, without telling him about this data, about these victims, I had him do a map of the energy currents in San Bernardino. And then I took that map and essentially laid the corresponding places associated with these deaths on that map, and they matched. And when I say they matched, they connected to this current, and that was kind of shocking. And there you go. I was off to the races, as they say. Now, I was investigating this for a year before I even considered writing about it. So I didn't. This was something that was just a private investigation that I was doing, and it took me a while to decide to go ahead and write about it.
Well, it's really interesting. Now, what is the connection to Aleister Crowley?
Aleister Crowley, excuse me, he had been on a trip from New York to the western United States, and because of the war in Mexico, the railroads, the southernmost route of the railroad that goes to the America's South, they were rechanneling all the passenger traffic by rail from the west coast to the east coast to the more northern route, which takes you through northern Arizona, northern New Mexico, and Panhandle of Texas, stuff like that, because of the war in Mexico. Well, I was able, because of railroad records, I was able to prove that Aleister Crowley himself had to have come through San Bernardino, because all the passenger railroad traffic going from the west coast, from California to the east coast, would go through San Bernardino anyway. Okay? Now, when you have everybody some of it would go from San Diego directly to Arizona, but most of it would go through San Bernardino because it was the major railroad hub on the west coast in the southwestern United States. That's what built the city up to begin with. And Crowley had been in San Diego, and he went back to Washington, D.C., and in his diaries, it talks about him being in San Diego, having gone through past the Grand Canyon area. And in order for him to do that, I went and looked at historical records, talked to railroad, and was able to prove through those means that Crowley had to have gone through San Bernardino on this route, and that was in early November of 1915, just a few days before the woman Cora Stanton was found dead.
Oh, wow.
Now, there's no telling how long he stayed in San Bernardino, and because of being who he is and was, the book goes into the whys and wherefores as to might he have, come this way for a purpose associated with San Bernardino, not so much the Grand Canyon. And the book gets into that. Now, I have people that tell me, oh, that's it. Crowley did it. He was involved. He was the man. I have a really good friend who's a researcher that gets angry with me when I tell him, I'm sorry, as a criminal investigator, I'm telling you, Crowley was not involved with these deaths, and he would have strongly disapproved of them. If I'm right about what they are, he would have strongly disapproved of them. But he came through here.
But why? Why do you think that's a little bit too coincidental. I'm not saying he was involved, but it would almost seem like there might be some connection between his being there and these things happening, whether it's somebody doing it to impress him, to anger him, to whatever.
Well, remember, this is 1915 Aleister Crowley. This isn't 1930 Aleister Crowley or 1940 Aleister Crowley. This is 1915 Aleister Crowley.
That's true.
He was about 40 years old. He was known at that time just as much, if not more so, as a mountain climber and an adventurer. And think about it. In Southern California, wow. The only people... the people that would have known who, what he was really into and known a lot about him, some of those probably would have been in the spiritualist temple, to be sure. But I think it's possible that he might have been summoned there, who knows, by the police, by the Secret Service, because as the book goes into, there was some intelligence, national security, and World War I intrigues going on in the area during that time that are involved in this, because as Empire of the Wheel 2 goes into identifying who I believe is the true identity of Cora Stanton, it gets into her role as an intelligence agent for the U.S., most likely.
Oh, boy. There we go back to the intelligence agencies again.
You're absolutely right. Oh, well, let me tell you, I don't know if if people look at the description books, they probably already know, but I identify Cora Stanton as the legendary Etta Place.
And I'm sorry, you've lost me there. Etta Place. Oh,
Etta Place.
Right
okay, well, let me throw a couple other names at you. Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid.
Oh, well, yeah, okay. Oh, that Etta. Okay.
And I'll tell you another thing, and it's all in the book, Empire of the Wheel 2, and part of it's in Empire of the Wheel 1. Let me tell you. She was neither Sundance's nor Butch's girlfriend. She was neither one of their wife, okay? She was not a prostitute from a saloon, okay? She might have been working in that saloon, but she was not a prostitute. Etta Place was a secular nun.
Oh, wow.
This is what I propose, and I present all the evidence for that. Part of it is presented in the first book, but I make that argument more strongly in the second book.
Oh, my goodness.
You can learn why, and I explain why her connection with Sundance was most likely a professional partnership, because he was probably also a government agent.
Oh.
Now it's getting interesting, huh?
Jeez. Now, what agency would he have been?
He would have either been working for the what eventually became the RCMP, the Canadians, the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, and she would have been Secret Service. He might have also been Secret Service by that time.
Was there Secret Service at that time?
Oh, absolutely. And guess what? When it came to, there was no FBI. And here's the thing. When it came to counterintelligence and national security, the Secret Service was the only federal game in town. The Secret Service at that time did what the FBI eventually took over, and that was going after spies. They didn't just protect the president, and they didn't just go after Treasury violations. They were the main federal agency for going after spies. And you had German agents, and you had East Indian, Hindu, if they identified them as such back then, agents, just all over California. Matter of fact, the most famous court trial in California history, I think even before OJ, get this, I mean, that tells you, I think the most expensive one relatively, up until modern times, was a trial where they put some East Indian saboteurs who had been blowing up ships in California harbors. They put them on trial. They were committing acts of terrorism in California. Here's the interesting thing, and the book goes into the details, but there was this big thing called the German Hindu conspiracy. Germany and England, as we know, in 1915 were at war in Europe, right? So Germany wanted to keep England busy on two fronts. So Germany was selling guns to Indian rebels in Burma. So they were supplying these guns through the United States. They would bring them up into Texas through the Gulf. They would put them on trains, take them west to California, in Southern California, which meant they had to come through San Bernardino, and they would ship them on to San Diego, where they were being put on boats and sailed across the Pacific to Burma to be given to terrorists and revolutionaries in India to give the British a hard time over there. Now, we know this because a ship called the Annie Larson was captured off of San Diego doing just that. This is all documented history. So you had all this intelligence intrigue going on around all this stuff, and there in the middle of it was the legendary Etta Place. And she was quite, wow. She's the star of the show. Oh, yeah. She's the star of the show.
That's really wild. You know, it's time to take another break. So we are going to be gone for just a couple minutes, and then we'll be back with my guest, Walter Bosley. Hope you'll stay tuned. We'll be right back.
Hello, everyone. Lorian Fenton here, host of the California MUFON radio show, asking if you'd like special access to exclusive and amazing information about UFOs, the paranormal, and all things unexplained. If you're nodding yes, then join IRN's Insider Club. As an Insider Club member, you'll get an all-access pass to premier Inception Radio Network content for only $4.99 a month. This includes live UFO and paranormal conferences, live streaming UFO skywatches, exclusive IRN radio and TV productions, and of course, paying radio with MJ and Ken Storch. So don't wait any longer. Visit InceptionRadioNetwork.com and click on Member Login to join IRN's Insider Club and get your VIP access today.
Are you a fan of Inception Radio Network? Do you reckon it's the best alternative talk radio station on the planet? Well, if you do, head to facebook.com/Inception Radio Network and like the page. Tell your friends, spread the word, and keep listening to the best. Do you have a smartphone? If so, Inception Radio Network is the best app for you. Available on iTunes, Android, Samsung, and most other app stores. Just search Inception Radio Network. With the app you can listen live, check out podcasts of recent and past shows, view our videos, see what shows are coming up, who the guests are, and, via the chat room, send live questions to those guests. You know it makes sense. Check your app store now. Inception Radio Network. I'll see you there.
Hey, IRN listeners, make sure you tune in to Night Vision Radio with René Barnett. René will be exposing the truth one secret at a time. When? Thursdays. Every Thursday, 10:30 p.m. Eastern, 7:30 p.m. Pacific. Where? Right here on IRN.
You're locked into Inception Radio Network, Superior, Wisconsin.
Goodbye, summer. Hello, new fall fashion. This is a great time to shop Macy's Backstage. I know, prices are so low you never need a coupon. They have all the hottest looks for the new season for men, women, kids. Plus shoes, accessories, handbags, pet gear, toys, home decor. All our favorite brands, great designers. We always find something. Best of all, new fall finds arrive every week. We'll miss you, summer. The fall looks awesome. Macy's Backstage savings for everyday life. Visit Macy'sBackstage.com for a location near you.
Para mi mamita que me quita mi popó. Esa es para mi mamita que me quita mi popó. Esa es para mi mamita que me quita mi popó.
Welcome back. You're listening to Night Vision Radio. I'm René Barnett. With me tonight is Walter Bosley. He is the author of a series of books called Empire of the Wheel, and other books too, which we're going to get into in just a moment. But before we get into some of the other things, I know there's a really interesting book that you did on Disneyland and sort of some occult secrets there. But before we do that, Empire of the Wheel, can you explain to us? I know you've mentioned the Catherine and the Wheel connection, but how did you choose that name, and what is Empire of the Wheel?
It's very simple. The San Bernardino Valley and Riverside area is really the heart of what's known as the Inland Empire of Southern California, and because this stuff. Hecate is in the middle of all this stuff, and her symbol's the wheel. I just simply called it Empire of the Wheel.
Oh, that's really interesting. That's good. I didn't know whether that was some sort of like secret society, Empire of the Wheel.
And it's not the Rotary Club either.
No, I doubt that very much. Now, you've written also a book about Disneyland. And also, how do we get your books before we go any further? Because I know we're going to run out of time before we get that in if I don't stop us right now.
They're all at Amazon on Kindle, which I remind everybody, or if you don't know, Amazon gives the Kindle app away for free. You do not have to have a Kindle device. Just go there and download the app on any device that you prefer, and then you can buy and read Kindle books. Or they're available in print at lulu.com, Lulu.com.
Oh, lulu.com. Okay, well, we'll definitely check those out. I know I'm going to. Now, the book on Disneyland, how in the world did that come into being? And can you share with us just a few of the things that you turned up in your book? Because we want everybody to read it.
Sure, and that one predates all the Empire of the Wheel investigation because, as I said earlier, when I discovered the Cora Stanton mystery, I was actually doing some follow-up on the Disneyland research by following the ley lines out of Disneyland across Southern California, the energy lines, and that led me to the Ghost Story at Inland Center. But I had that book got its start on a mutual friend of ours, Greg Bishop, on his show, Radio Mysterioso. We were sitting there one night and musing on things, and the subject of Club 33 at Disneyland came up.
Yeah.
And it's an exclusive restaurant kind of situation there. And, we wondered, well, golly, why did they call that Club 33? And in our research on air, we discovered that Disneyland is literally at latitude 33, it's either 118 or 1881, something like that. And we thought, well, gosh, we wonder if there's something to that. And then I looked into it deeper and discovered that a man named Cornelius Vanderbilt Wood, C.V. Wood, had actually been the engineer who designed and led the building of physical Disneyland as we know it. And the Disneys had hired him from the legendary SRI, Stanford Research Institute, the same guys that brought us remote viewing and other interesting things.
Yeah.
And one thing led to another in weirdness, not the least of which was the reason I think we're talking about Disneyland was because I had a very strange and interesting experience at Disneyland myself in the early 80s. That had stayed with me for years and led me to even learning about the original ley line, so to speak, research done by a man named Alfred Watkins. And so with that experience and that's all outlined, that's all discussed in the book, Latitude 33, Key to the Kingdom. But with that experience and then with this discussion with Greg Bishop and the follow-up research, I decided, wow, there's a book here. I mean, there's enough here that I'm finding about Disneyland and this esoteric stuff that we love so much that, I got to write about this. I got to get this down. And so there it is.
Now, what do you think? the Club 33, I've never had the pleasure of being there. I have had
I've never had
friends.
the money.
Yeah, I've had friends that have gone there. Is that what it takes? Is just money, or?
Yeah, basically it's an exclusive thing. You pay a membership. There's a waiting list to be a member of Club 33. My understanding is it's the only place at Disneyland where you can have alcohol with a meal. And
Right.
it's just a little exclusive restaurant. I think there's really cool Disney arcana and stuff on the walls. And
Yeah.
I've never been inside the place. I mean, for years they never even showed a picture inside of it. But it's just kind of and think about it. It's probably something that was put in there so that when celebrities came to the park or whatever, they could have a place, VIPs or whatever, they could have a place to go and not be surrounded by us common folk.
Oh
all the
yeah,
time.
we wouldn't want that.
And its location is right there in New Orleans Square, just a couple doors down. It's right next to the exit of Pirates of the Caribbean. It's just a plain door with a nice fancy plate that says, has the number 33, and it's got a slot. And apparently you put your membership card through there and they open the door for you. And, you just go in and have your meal and relax. And,
Wow.
that's it. There's really nothing sinister
Yeah,
or overly arcane
as I
about
said,
it.
I have a friend who has been there fairly recently. He actually posted some pictures on Facebook. I wonder if he was taking them surreptitiously, not supposed to be doing that. I don't know.
Oh, he took photos of Club 33? Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, he posted
I'd
them
like
on
to
his
see those.
Facebook page.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'll send them to you.
Cool.
Okay.
So, but it's just one thing led to another, and like I said, I talk about what the personal experience was with an old man named Alfred. There's a hint for you. I talked about Alfred Watkins. Wait till you read about it in the book. And it's just a whole interesting way of looking at the park that,
And did Walt Disney have anything to do with this? Or, I mean, you always hear,
I don't think so.
conspiracy theories about Walt
Right.
Disney.
And you hear all this stuff that he was a Mason, which
he was a Freemason.
my research showed that he was not in any lodge that any Masonic authority I went to could identify, or anyone's ever been able to identify. He was in De Malay when he was in high school. Now, De Malay, of course, is a Masonic-sponsored youth organization.
Yeah.
But he never entered a lodge in adulthood, and and really, Walt was, the people that I know that have encountered him personally, they'll tell you he liked to smoke, he liked to drink, and he liked to cuss like a sailor. But Walt doing rituals and all this stuff, I personally find ridiculous. And
Yeah, probably somebody did just make that up out of the De Malay cloth. But, where I grew up in southeastern Oklahoma, there was a De Malay chapter in my town. And it was just, those guys didn't have any idea of any kind of secret society connections or anything like that. It was just, something, it was just social.
Right.
For them.
Yeah.
So, if that's all they could turn up.
If you're looking for the guy who put these strange things that I talk about in the book and that did strange stuff with Disneyland, you need to be looking at C.V. Wood, the man from SRI who the Disneys hired. And then they ultimately fired him because he was kind of going out there presenting himself as the man who created Disneyland. Well, Walt Disney considered himself the man who created Disneyland. Wood is just the man who built it. And there is a distinction to be made there between the two. But C.V. Wood, by all reports, I even talked to people who knew him personally. They say he's a really nice guy, and he was a showman. And their view of that whole fallout with Walt Disney was that, you had two guys that were showmen, and they had egos,
Sure.
And, they clashed a little bit, and it was, well, Mr. Wood, we don't need your services anymore. But it's very interesting what Mr. Wood engineered into that park. And that's all laid out in the book.
Can you give us just a few little details of that?
Oh, sure. The Carousel.
Most of people have been, certainly in Southern California.
Oh, sure.
People have been to Disneyland.
Between 1955, when it opened, and 1982, when they had redesigned Fantasyland and reopened it, or I'm sorry, when they shut down, 1982, when they shut down Fantasyland to redo it, the carousel sat in a particular spot. It was moved during the 1982 revamp of Fantasyland, but the spot that it had sat upon originally is where my geomorphology guy, Seshari, has mapped out the intersection of 3 Telluric current, we'll call it ley lines for simplicity, of these lines. An intersection of 3 of these lines, the carousel sat right on top of it. And the theory is, see, Disneyland is built in a bowl. People don't realize that. When you go into Disneyland, the deeper you go into the park, you're going down into a bowl. And the train that goes around the park is the berm of that bowl. It's kind of a rough triangle-shaped bowl with rounded corners, but it is a bowl. And the idea is that the carousel, as it spun, would have drawn the energy up of this intersection of these 3 lines and then redistributed it through the park. And because it's in a bowl, that energy would flow through the park and then kind of come up on the berm, but just through the spin and through the shape, it would then come back in and flow back in on itself. So it was kind of self-containing, the energy. And the carousel would have been the operative piece of the whole. Like, if you think of Disneyland as a machine, the carousel was that spinning carousel was the main central piece that made it all work.
But now the carousel's moved.
The carousel's moved. When I had my experience, it started while I was riding the carousel when it was still in its original position. Okay, so when I was riding the carousel that particular night that I had my strange encounter, the carousel was still directly above this intersection of these 3 ley lines, energy lines. And while I was riding the carousel, that's when I noticed the man named Alfred standing and watching. And then I encountered him just minutes later, seated on a bench, almost as if he was waiting for me to approach. And
did you?
Yes, of course. I felt like, there's something about this old man I want to talk to. I'm a high school kid, and he was wearing a black suit and a white shirt with no tie, no hat. He had snow white hair and a close cropped beard. And, he was just looking at the place like he was in wonder, like a little child almost. And this was in the days of the ticket books. You could either get the passport ticket or the ticket books, so the E ticket, the A ticket, the B ticket.
Yeah.
And he was almost out of tickets. And I had the passport ticket at that time. So he had a ticket where he could still ride Small World. So I had 2 friends with me, by the way, 2 witnesses to this. And we went on the Small World with Alfred. And then after the ride, it was getting to be like 9:30 at night, and the park closed at 11. And I was, being a Californian, I'm always going to Disneyland. Here was this, nice old gentleman, and so I took my passport and I attached it to his coat lapel, pinned it with one of those character pins, and I told him, I said, "Look, with that passport, you can go ride everything you want as many times as you want. You still got, an hour and a half to go see the rest of the park and do other things." And he was just so nice and so grateful. He couldn't believe that I gave him my passport ticket. And, and then he walked back into Fantasyland, and that was it, except something nagged me about that experience for years throughout the rest of the 80s. And then there I was in 1990, 92. And I was in a bookstore in Manhattan. I was working for the FBI. I was in the old, I don't know if it's still there, the Coliseum bookstore at Columbus Circle. And it was the first time I'd ever heard of ley lines. I picked up this book called The Old Straight Track. And it's a ley line energy, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, oh, this is kind of interesting. I had heard about them in the late 80s in reference to some UFO research some other guys had done, but I didn't really know that much about them. So in 92, I'm looking at this book. I'm going, wow, this is interesting. And it's by a guy named Alfred Watkins. Now, I didn't say before, but the old man had told me his name was Alfred, by the way.
Right.
So I opened this book up, and there's a photo of Alfred Watkins. And I tell you, I got goosebumps, and it kind of freaked me out a little bit because I was looking at the photo of the man I met at Disneyland in '81. Okay, and
when did he live?
Well, he died in 1935, 1940. Wow. Yeah, it was. Yeah, see, he had died a couple of decades or so before I encountered his double at Disneyland, also named Alfred.
Wow. Now that is wild. Now, have you seen that footage that's been made public of the ghost at Disneyland?
I've seen the most recent.
There's someone just walking through the place.
Yeah. Interesting, isn't it? The book has a chapter on the various hauntings at the park, and that's a very interesting subject. Here's something that I discovered, and I believe I learned this from Marla James. Her and her husband are ghost researchers in Southern California, and they had done extensive research around Anaheim and such. But Marla had told me that when people die at Disneyland, I don't know if it's this way, but it used to be this way, they have an arrangement with the city and the hospital that the victim, the deceased, will be taken the hospital and declared dead there, that they won't be declared dead in the park.
Oh, so no one will ever be declared dead at Disneyland.
Yeah, that was what I was told. That was the understanding of between the park and the. So, people have died there, but they don't get declared dead. I mean, except in the obvious cases. I think there was a gentleman who was killed on one of the roller coasters about 10 years ago. But generally, the death declaration is outside the park, but people have died there. There was a boy who died drowning in the river, the water surrounding Tom Sawyer's Island. There's been employees killed there and stuff. So,
wow, very, very, very strange. Mm. Now, have you had any other experience around this Alfred character?
No, Disneyland was the one time I've experienced Alfred, and then the interesting, discovery, 11 years later, of Alfred T. Watkins, and there he is investigating these lines and if they are associated with Earth energy. I discussed in the book what I think that experience, the possible explanations for that experience, just a big old coincidence, like the skeptic priests will say, or could it be this, could it be that? And my personal favorite, of course, is that old Alfred Watkins in 1925 stepped into an intersection and got transported to Disneyland in 1981. I'd love for that to be the case, right?
Yeah.
That would be totally cool, but for whatever reason, I don't know the exact answer as to why this doppelganger for Alfred Watkins, who studied these lines, and then here I am seeing this double.
I mean, it's kind of strange to see. How old did that gentleman appear to be? You said he had white hair.
Yeah, well, here's what's interesting is at the time I said, oh, this guy's got to be around 70 years old. Well, then later I learned that when Watkins, was investigating this stuff, he was like 69 or 70. In the photo I was looking at, he was 69 or 70. He was 69 years old, I believe. So, hey, that's...
Did you ever share that photo in the book with your friends that were with you that day?
Oh, well, no, that was in Southern California. This is 11 years later. I'm, 27, 28 years old or whatever.
Yeah.
And, there I am. No, I think I was 28 or 29. I'm in Manhattan working for the FBI. And I think, what's funny is I don't think that I've actually been with any of the folks that were on that Disneyland trip since then.
Did they wonder why you were so interested in this old guy that you ran into? Did your friends?
They just thought I was being, a nice kid, being nice to the older gentleman, being nice to the old guy. In fact, they said, when I gave them the ticket, we're walking away, they're going, "Oh, that was really nice of you." I'm like, something just, I don't know. And honestly, I just kind of felt compelled to do it. And I discussed that in the book. There's a certain interesting thing, possibly, more to some other thing. It's, the book gets into the resulting implications of that simple act of me giving him my ticket. And that has to do with when somebody comes from one of the other realms and you just willingly give them a gift that they reward you in certain ways. And,
that's really wild. I
didn't notice at the time, by the way. That's something that I learned years later.
Yeah. I had a strange experience similar to that. I won't get into on this show, but with a medicine man in Oklahoma that I had given a gift, and then some really wild stuff happened. Right after.
That's usually what the reward is, huh? People think, "Oh, reward, a pot of gold," right? I wish. No, it was a gold mine of experiences, and it was more like a door being opened is the reward.
I think we do have those times in our lives, where there are those key moments that come into play that sort of give us a little jump. And it seems that, you said you were just beginning to look into that, the ley line phenomenon, and then you come across this book, and of course you recognize the gentleman, and then I would imagine that book yielded some information to you that you probably needed at the time.
The interesting thing was I looked through the book, and I never read it. Never read the whole thing. It was, I'll be honest with you, my intuition told me that I learned everything I needed to know. It just that basically what it was he was known for regarding the ley lines and seeing his image. I think that was the purpose of me finding that book. Somebody was telling me, this is Alfred. This is the, or, and I get into this in the book, or the use of the double was juxtaposed into my path so that later I would, when I came across this book, it would prompt me to then subsequently investigate this Disneyland mystery. So, even if it wasn't Alfred himself, it was somebody or something moving some things around to get me to write this book. I have some other theories that I will not go into.
If you don't mind, we're right, just down to the final 2 minutes or less than 2 minutes of the show. Could you just name some of your other books and give us just a brief idea of what those are about?
Sure. Well, about the Empire of the Wheel trilogy. And there's even aspects we didn't even get into that'll, I think, blow some minds, particularly the second one with At a Place. And about the Disneyland book, Latitude 33. Well, there's also Secret Missions, The Hidden Legacy of Old California. And that one is my most recent nonfiction book. And that gets into the truth about the explorer Juan Cabrillo, and why he came to California, what he was doing here, and what his identity and his origin and his fate actually were, I think. And it also gets into the fact that he, I believe, was looking. His trip to California had to do with an medieval relic, an old relic that I think was vaulted here in California. And it gets into some interesting stuff regarding the Templars in America and all that. So it's called Secret Missions, The Hidden Legacy of Old California. And I am presently working on Secret Missions 2, which I have not yet revealed who and what that's about. I've only revealed part of the title. It's Secret Missions 2, The Lost Expedition of, and I leave it blank.
Wow. Walter Bosley, thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's been
thank you for having me on.
90 minutes. Thank you so much. Take care, everybody, and I hope you'll join us next week for another edition of Night Vision Radio. Have a great week, everybody.